November 1581. The air in the Alexander Palace hangs heavy with the bite of early frost, seeping through the thick stone walls of the Kremlin like a thief in the night. You stand in the antechamber, your breath fogging the rushlight flames that gutter against the chill, their oily smoke curling upward to mingle with the metallic tang of blood already spilled somewhere unseen. The floor rushes crack underfoot, damp from the melt of snow tracked in by black-cloaked guards, their boots thudding like distant war drums. A low murmur rises from the shadow servants whispering in Old Church Slavonic, prayers half-formed, swallowed by fear. Then, a sharper sound, the scepter's iron-shod tip scraping against oak paneling, deliberate, echoing off the gilded icons that stare down with painted eyes unblinking. The door bursts open, and there he is, Ivan Vasilievich, Tsar of all Rus, his frame gaunt beneath fur-trimmed robes, eyes wild as a cornered wolf's, veins bulging at his temples like rivers in flood. His son, Ivan Ivanovich, sprawls before him, 27 years old, heir to an empire forged in ice and iron, clutching his side where the blow has landed, crimson, blooming through brocade like a heresy unfurling. The Tsar freezes, scepter raised for another strike, his chest heaving with the ragged pull of breath that tastes of sour kvass and unspent rage. The room tilts into silence, broken only by the heir's gasp, wet and final. Guards avert their gazes. The icons seem to weep resin tears in the flickering light. In that frozen instant, father and son lock eyes, one pleading, one unraveling, and the Tsar whispers something lost to history, a curse or a caress, before the weapon descends again. What kind of mind, twisted by decades of dominion, turns the blood of its own line to ink on the page of regret? Before we go further, I need to be transparent. What you're about to hear involves sexual violence and systematic torture, woven into the fabric of Ivan IV's reign as the first Tsar of Russia. These details are historically documented, drawn from primary sources like the reports of Papal legate Antonio Possevino, the memoirs of English ambassador Jerome Horsey, and the Nikon Chronicle, a vast compilation of Muscovite annals from the 16th century, corroborated by modern scholarship such as Isabel de Madariaga's Ivan the Terrible, 2005, and Charles Halperin's Ivan the Terrible, Free to Reward and Free to Punish, 2022. But they are deeply disturbing, evoking the raw machinery of unchecked power that preys on the vulnerable. If these shadows feel too close, if they stir something that demands a pause, I completely understand. There's no judgment in choosing to step away. Self-preservation is the first act of remembrance. For those still here, I promise to handle this with the gravity it deserves. We'll focus on understanding the system that allowed this, not exploiting the suffering, but dissecting how it mirrored the boyars' intrigues and the steppe Khan's raids that shaped Ivan's world. These aren't just horror stories. They're warnings about what absolute rule becomes when it devours its own roots, echoing in modern tyrannies where leaders lash out at kin amid crumbling thrones. This wasn't a father's momentary lapse, a storm cloud passing over familial skies. This was the fracture of a machine, oiled by 3 decades of ritualized cruelty toward the women of his court noblewomen, plucked like winter apples from their estates, inspected, claimed, broken not for love or lust alone, but to cement a network of fear that bound the boyars to silence. Ivan IV Vasilievich, born in 1530 amid the smoke of Moscow's wooden palaces, ascended as Grand Prince at 3, Tsar at 16, and architect of an empire that stretched from the Baltic's frozen shores to the Ural's jagged spine. But beneath the conquests, the conquest of Kazan in 1552, the Livonian War's grinding sieges from 1558 onward, lurked a pathology, paranoia forged in orphanhood, exploding into the Oprichnina of 1565, a state terror that divided Russia into Tsarist domains and boyar enemies, where black-hooded riders on black horses executed treason with whips and axes. The murder of his heir wasn't madness unbound. It was the logical terminus of a system where women served as proxies for disloyalty, their bodies battlegrounds for Ivan's dread of betrayal. Jerome Horsey, that sharp-eyed Englishman at court from 1572 to 1586, noted in his travels how Ivan would have all the fairest virgins brought unto him to satisfy his beastly lust, a practice rooted in Mongol precedents but amplified by Ivan's syphilitic fevers and epileptic rages. As forensic analyses of his exhumed remains in 1963 suggest mercury treatments for venereal disease that rotted his mind as surely as his flesh. The central question isn't whether you can stomach the truth of that November day in 1581, when a scepter's blow felled the future of the Rurikid dynasty. It's whether you're willing to remember it not as spectacle, but as blueprint, how a ruler, haunted by the ghosts of his regency's abuses, replicated them on his own bloodline, leaving Russia to the time of troubles and a legacy of autocracy that whispers in Putin's purges or Kim's dynastic purges today. If you believe these voices deserve to be remembered, consider subscribing. Every view helps unearth more from forgotten archives, turning whispers into warnings. To understand what happened in that frost-laced chamber to Ivanovich, you need to understand the machine that birthed the man who wielded the scepter. Russia, in the mid-16th century, was no unified realm, but a patchwork of principalities stitched by the blood of the Golden Horde's retreat. Their Khan's yokes lifted only in 1480 at the Ugra River's standoff. Moscow, under Ivan III, had claimed the title Tsar of all Rus, echoing Byzantine Caesars, but Ivan IV inherited a court seething with boyars, landed nobles, whose vast Votchina estates rivaled the treasury's coffers. Economically, the realm teetered. Fur taxes from Siberian outposts trickled in, but the Livonian Crusade drained silver like a sieve, while peasant flight to the frontiers eroded serfdom's base. Militarily, the Streltsy musketeers and Cossack hosts clashed with Polish lances and Tatar sabres, forging a nation in perpetual siege mentality. Socially, the hierarchy was ironclad, clergy in black robes intoning divine right from the Assumption Cathedral, merchants haggling sable pelts in the Kitai-Gorod bazaars, and women, noble women, especially pawns in alliances, veiled in Kokoshnik headdresses, their dowries, the glue of feuds. These events are documented in primary sources like the Piskarevsky Chronicle, a Novgorodian annal from the 1572, corroborated by archaeological digs at the Oprichnina's Alexandrov Kremlin, where mass graves unearthed in the 1952 revealed skeletons with axe wounds and mercury traces, attesting to Ivan's cleansings. A letter from Venetian diplomat Michele Soriano in 1569 describes the court's psychological warfare, where whispers of treason turned kin against kin, much like modern surveillance states logging dissent. Don't rush the canvas. This was a world where power wasn't inherited but seized, block by block, betrayal by betrayal. He wasn't born a monster. He was manufactured, layer by layer, in the crucible of a childhood that read like a chronicle of calculated neglect. Ivan Vasilievich entered the world on the 25th of August, 1530, in the Kolomenskoye Palace south of Moscow, third son to Grand Prince Vasily III, a towering figure with a beard like frozen rivers, stern as the codex of church laws he enforced, and Elena Glinskaya, a Serbian beauty whose dark eyes and sharp tongue masked a lineage tied to the fallen horde. Vasily, at 50, had waited decades for an heir. Ivan's birth was hailed with bells from the Ivan the Great Tower, but joy curdled swift. Elena, ambitious and foreign, ruled as regent when Vasily perished in 1533 from a festering ulcer during a hunt, his body bloated and reeking of gangrene as he gasped final edicts from a litter near Volok. Ivan, 3 years old, watched from afar, clad in miniature kaftan, as boyars like Andrei Shwisky, pale, hawk-nosed schemers with estates in Suzdal usurped the throne, poisoning Elena in 1538 with arsenic, her convulsions witnessed by foreign envoys who noted her lips foaming like a rabid fox. The Letopis annals record how she clutched Ivan to her breast, whispering of Glinsky treachery, before succumbing in her chambers, the air thick with the acrid bite of hemlock. By age 8, Ivan was the last thread of his line, a boy ghost haunting the Terem Palace, where Shwisky's guards starved him of bread and tutors, tossing bones at his feet like a kennel's scraps. He grew feral, organizing street urchins into mock armies that pelted boyars with mud in Red Square, his laughter a blade's edge. The family that might have anchored him dissolved in descending shadows. Uncles like Yuri Ivanovich, blind and brooding in a Dimitrov tower, strangled in 1537 by rivals who claimed apoplexy, his body dumped in the Yauza River, bloated by spring thaw. Cousins from the Belsky clan, robust youths with Elena's fire, fled or fell to purges, one beheaded in 1542 for sorcery, his head displayed on a pike as ravens pecked the eyes. Ivan, alone, devoured chronicles by candlelight, his small hands tracing maps of Kazan Khanates, dreaming of reconquest. Psychological transformation staged itself in fits. At 13, during his coronation in 1547, he collapsed in epileptic seizure amid the Uspensky incense, foaming as metropolitans chanted exorcisms, the crowd murmuring of demonic possession. Recent scholarship, like Sergei Bogatyrev's Ivan the Terrible, 2023, posits temporal lobe epilepsy exacerbated by childhood trauma, turning boyish rages into messianic visions. He saw himself as scourge of God, purging Rus like biblical plagues. The turning point came not in thunder, but in the quiet click of a lock. In 1547, wed to Anastasia Romanovna, a gentle soul with auburn braids and a voice like vesper bells, daughter of boyar intrigue, but balm to his storms, Ivan tasted stability. She bore him 6 children, her counsel a whisper against the boyar's roar, until her death in 1560, poisoned by Kusevlev plotters, her body racked with belladonna's delusions as she clawed at phantoms in her bedchamber. Ivan, 30, howled through Moscow's nights, commissioning icons of her as saintly intercessor, but the loss cracked him open. There never was a better servant nor a worse master, writes Heinrich von Steden, a German Oprichnina who defected in 1578. His memoir smuggled to Europe, detailing how grief metastasized into grievance. Ivan retreated to the Alexandrov Kremlin, a fortress of red brick and moats 90 versts north, where he decreed the Oprichnina in 1565, dividing the realm, executing boyars like Vladimir Staritsky. His cousin, forced to swallow diamonds, ground to dust in 1569, choking on wealth's edge. From there, the machine whirred. Women, once alliances, became assets in erasure, and then everything changed. The first summons went out to the noble estates, couriers on lathered horses bearing seals of the double-headed eagle, demanding gifts for the Tsar's bedchamber virgins of pure blood, to be inspected not as brides, but as proofs of fealty. The court maidens, those daughters of the Golden Horde's faded glory, became the system's first cogs, their silences, the oil that kept the terror turning. What I'm about to describe isn't random predation, a tyrant's whim, unchecked. It's a system, 5 distinct phases etched into the annals, each calibrated to erode a pillar of resistance: fealty, lineage, faith, memory, and finally, the self. These acts spanned from the Oprichnina's dawn in 1565 to the heir's shadow in 1581, documented in Possevino's Moscovia, 1581, where the legate, a Jesuit scholar with ink-stained fingers, recounts audiences in the Golden Palace and in the Synodal Chronicle, a clerical ledger of sins that tallies the Tsar's takings like tithes to hell. Each phase destroyed not just flesh, but the invisible threads of society, the boyar's whispers, the church's murmurs, the peasants' songs that once wove Rus together. First came the inspections, those clinical rituals that strip nobility of illusion, beginning in the sweltering July of 1566 at the Alexandrov Kremlin. The sun baked the white stone walls, turning the air to a stew of horse sweat and wild thyme from the surrounding birch groves, while inside the terem's vaulted halls, damask drapes hung limp in the heat, absorbing the scent of beeswax candles guttering on icon stands. Present were the Oprichniki 500 black-robed enforcers, their hoods embroidered with broom and dog's head, symbols of sweeping clean and savage guard, clad in sable-trimmed kaftans that whispered like conspiracies as they lined the corridors. Politically, this unfolded amid the Oprichnina's infancy, just months after Ivan's flight to Tver in December 1564, where he extorted guarantees of absolute rule from a trembling Zemshchina council, the Boyars' land assembly that conceded power to avoid civil war. The atmosphere thickened with the low hum of lutes from wandering skomoroki, their bawdy tales silenced mid-note by a guard's glare, and the faint clink of silver goblets as wine soured untasted on oaken tables, laden with black bread and salted sturgeon. Maria Koltsova, 22, daughter of a Ryazan boyar, whose Pomesty lands supplied the Tsar's falcons, arrived by sleigh despite the summer, her journey a blur of dust-choked roads from the Oka River. She was no stranger to court. Raised in a wooden terem tower veiled from men, she embroidered samplers with psalms, her fingers nimble as a harpsichord's, dreaming of a match to secure her brother's claim on disputed meadows. Her family traced to the Appanage princes, loyal since the Horde's fall, and she carried a locket with her mother's miniature, painted in fading lapis. What she thought that morning, as grooms led her mare to the stables, perhaps a summons to petition for grain tithes, or alliance whispers anything but the ledger's cold math. The chamberlain, a stooped eunuch named Fyodor, bowed low, his voice a rasp. The Tsar graces you with audience. Led through antechambers where frescoes of martyred saints bled ochre in the light, she entered the privy solar, a room of Persian rugs and ivory chess sets, the air heavy with ambergris from Ivan's pomander. He sat enthroned in cloth of gold, 46 now, his once auburn beard streaked mercury white from cures, eyes recessed like wolf dens, studying her as one might a mare at Tula fair height. Hips, the curve of throat beneath her kokoshnik. Turn, he commanded, and she did, cheeks burning, the silk of her sarafan rustling like dry leaves. No words of welcome, only a nod to attendants who parted her sleeves, palpating arms for hidden scars of flagellation, a test for purity borrowed from Tatar harems. Maria's breath caught, dry as chaff, her stomach hollow from the dawn fast, but she held the saint's gaze on the walls, murmuring Oche Nash under breath. He led her away then, to the inner bedchamber, where brocade curtains muffled the world's clamour, the door sealing with a bar's thud. The room fell silent beyond, Oprichniki shifting like shadows, one coughing into his sleeve to mask unease. Hours passed, a servant emerged for kvass, face averted, and later, guards bore her out on a litter, her sarafan torn at the hem, gaze adrift like smoke from a doused fire. When they brought her back to her quarters that eve, she could not walk unaided, legs buckling on the threshold, but her lips moved in silent Latin prayers poached from a forbidden psalter, unbroken. She perished 3 moons later, of fluxes, the chronicles note. Her body returned to Ryazan in a lead-lined cart, womb barren, a warning etched in flesh to her kin, fealty's price. Possevino, interviewing survivors in 1581, records how such takings numbered dozens, each a thread pulled from the boyar tapestry. This wasn't about conquest of flesh alone. This was about the system of surveillance, where women's bodies became barometers of loyalty, yield silently, and your house thrives, resist, and axes fall on hearths. It revealed the Oprichnina's genius, not blunt axes, but scalpels of shame, turning fathers against daughters, brothers into informants. Horsey, in his travels, 1591, likens it to English witch trials, but amplified here, purity was political currency, a ledger entry in Ivan's endless audits of treason. Scholarly debate rages. De Madariaga argues it stabilized the throne by fracturing clans, while Halperin, 2022, sees economic motive, lands seized post-taking funding Livonian forts. Long-term, it unraveled the social fabric. By 1570, noble lineages thinned, intermarriages soured, birthing the Smuter's chaos. They didn't want martyrs rally. They wanted ghosts, echoes in empty terrums, their silence a chorus of submission. Modern parallels sting. Think Epstein's Island, not as aberration but network, where elites trade daughters for deniability, power's quiet erosion of consent. Ivan wasn't destroying individuals, he was hollowing the realm's marrow, one veiled summons at a time, and in that hollowness, the next phase stirred. But the inspections bred defiance in shadowed corners, whispers among the boyar wives who stitched coded samizdat into hems, so the machine adapted, escalating to the raids, the second act, a whirlwind of hooves and screams that swept the countryside from autumn 1567 into the snows of 1568. The winds howled off the steppes that October, carrying the chill of Crimean Tatars' scimitars, while leaves turned to blood-red carpets under the hooves of Oprichniki detachments mustering at Tver. The raids targeted not fortresses but farmsteads, the air alive with the snap of whips and the acrid burn of thatch, igniting under torch flame, mingled with the earthy reek of upturned soil, where families fled to root cellars. Who was present? Captains like Malyuta Skuratov, Ivan's grim vizier, a bear of a man with a scar trail from Kazan, his kaftan stiff, with old Gore leading squadrons in black, their horses caparisoned like funeral palfreys, bells muffled in wool. Politically, this crested as the Staritsky plot unraveled, cousin Vladimir's treason a pretext for land grabs, coinciding with Polish envoys haggling borders at the Dnieper. Sensory layers built slow, the creak of saddle leather as riders fanned out, the distant low of cattle driven off, the first cries piercing the dusk like shattered glass. Among the first seized was Anna Yusupova, 28, widow of a Belgorod Pomeshchik, whose Tatar bloodline descended from Khan Mamai, made her suspect. Her terem, a sturdy izba of pine logs, overlooking the Don's tributaries. She had buried her husband to plague in 1564, raising 2 sons in homespun piety, her days filled with distilling rosewater and teaching Cyrillic from horn books, her laughter a rare bloom in widow's weeds. What ran through her mind as dusk fell, the horizon darkening with riders' silhouettes? A neighbor's warning of black crows scouting estates, perhaps, or prayer for the harvest's meager rye. The gates splintered under ram, splinters flying like accusations, and Skuratov's men poured in, boots thudding on packed earth floors strewn with rushes. They dragged her from the hearth, where embers popped like distant gunfire, her shawl slipping to reveal braids coiled like serpents. For the Tsar's grace, the captain growled, binding her wrists with hemp rope that bit like frostbite, her protests drowned in the chaos of servants scattering, pots clattering to shatter on flagstones. Led to the courtyard, she faced the inspection impromptu Skuratov himself, breath hot with mead, circling her under lantern glow, the night air tasting of pine sap and fear sweat. No chamber's dignity, only the raw math of possession. Her pleas for her boys left cowering in the loft, their small forms, mere shadows in the rafters, met with backhanded slaps that split her lip, copper flooding her tongue. They bundled her onto a led horse, the ride a blur of jolting miles to a way station near Vladimir, where wayfarers' fires dotted the plain like fallen stars. There, in a barn reeking of hay mold and horse piss, the act unfolded, curtains of cloak drawn, her cries muffled by a gag of her own torn veil, the Oprichniki standing sentinel, their murmurs a litany of jests to steel nerves. Skip the violation's core, focus the aftermath, as dawn broke and they lashed her to the pommel, bruised and hollow, eyed, returned to her threshold like discarded chattel. Her sons rushed out, but she turned away, gaze vacant, whispering Bogoroditse Devo in fractured tones, her resistance a threadbare shield. The Piskarevsky Chronicle tallies such raids, claiming over 100 souls that season, lands annexed as vacant. Anna faded by Yule of Chill, her estate to Skuratov's kin. This phase unveiled the system's mobility, terror as itinerant court, where raids weren't retribution but revenue women as tolls on fealty's road, their lineages tainted to justify seizures. It fit broader patterns, echoing Timur's 1,395 razzias, but industrialized, with ledgers tracking yields like tax rolls. De Madariaga notes how it broke rural bonds, peasants fleeing to Cossack freedoms, while Halperin debates intent paranoia or policy. The impacts lingered. Depopulated volosts birthed famines by 1570, social hierarchies fracturing into starshina elites and serf masses. They sought not conquest, but contagion fear spreading like pox from raided hearths to Moscow salons. In today's lens, it's the warlord's playbook, Boko Haram's village sweeps, or Assad's barrel bombs, where violation weaponizes vulnerability, erasing community one hearth at a time. Ivan wasn't just claiming bodies, he was colonizing souls, the raid's dust settling as a shroud over Russ's heartland. Yet even as estates emptied, the church stirred, its bells tolling dissent. What happened next reveals the machine's pivot to the sacred, the third act cloaked in piety's folds, unfolding through the bitter lengths of 1569 to 1570, when blizzards sealed the Kremlin in drifts like unmarked graves. The winds moaned through the Chudov monastery's arches, carrying flakes that stung like God's rebuke, while inside the Uspensky Cathedral, frankincense coiled thick as serpents around the altar, masking the undernote of lie from scrubbed stone floors, where novices knelt in hair shirts. Present were the higher clergy, Metropolitan Philip Kolichev, a lion of a man with frost-rimed beard and eyes like hammered bronze, vested in gold-embroidered Falonian, flanked by boyars in ferias overcoats, their breaths pluming in the nave's chill. Politically, this crested with the Novgorod treason trials, phantom plots Ivan conjured from Lithuanian spies' whispers, as the Livonian front crumbled under Swedish pikes. Atmosphere layered deliberate, the chant of Velishnaya, set echoing off domes, painted with seraphim, the scrape of Psalter's vellum, the faint crackle of vigil lamps fed with olive oil from Venetian trade. Philip's niece, Eudoxia, 24, abbess of a Suzdal convent, whose walls echoed with Gregorian echoes smuggled from Byzantine exiles, was summoned not for heresy but homage. Orphaned to the veil at 12, after her father's execution for misliking in 1557, she had risen through vigils and herbals, her hands scarred from mortar-pounding simples, her counsel sought by pilgrims for visions of the Theotokos. In her mind, that Ash Wednesday, as the Tsar's missive arrived by post-horse, reeking of wax and haste, a call to bless the armies, perhaps, or intercede for peace, anything but the profane calculus that deemed her unconsecrated despite vows. Escorted to the palace under guard, her poshag veil fluttering like a banner of defiance, she entered the oratory where Ivan knelt before the Vladimir icon, his form prostrate but rigid, the air tasting of myrrh, an unspoken command. "Holy Mother," he murmured, rising to appraise her through the lattice screen, his gaze lingering on the curve beneath her habit, the way her fingers clasped a rosary of amber beads. No brutality yet, only the slow uncoiling, attendants parting the lattice at his nod, her protests, scriptural thunder on priestly overreach met with the soft click of manacles disguised as prayer beads. He led her to the sacristy then, a chamber of reliquaries and silk-wrapped chalices, the door barred against the outer world's chants. Silence swallowed the nave beyond, monks pausing mid-prostration, one dropping his censer in a clang of brass. Dawn's grey light filtered through frost-etched lancets when they carried her forth, habit-rent, her rosary beads scattered like fallen stars, but her voice hoarse, unbroken rose in Te Deum, a litany that shamed the icons. Returned to Suzdal by spring, she wasted to consumption, the convent's ledgers, noting her final gaze fixed on the east, as if citing judgment. The synodal chronicle links her fate to Philip's exile, beheaded in 1569 for decrying the Tsar's devil's work. Here, the system weaponized faith, turning convents into quarries for devout service, violations sanctified as divine right, echoing papal indulgences but inverted, piety as predator's cloak. It exposed power's theology. Ivan, self-crowned equal to Caesar, claimed women as pomestier grants from God, per his 1,572 correspondence with Kurbsky, the exiled general who decried it as sodomitic excess. Debate persists. Bogatyrev sees religious mania, Halperin fiscal church lands seized post-act. Impacts rippled, clergy cowed, schisms brewing toward the rascal of 1666, society bifurcated into fearful, faithful, and apostate fringes. Ghosts, not saints, they desired women whose vows, shattered, silenced monastic murmurs. Today, it mirrors televangelist scandals or clerical abuse rings, where sanctity shields predation, eroding trust in the divine one-veiled claim at a time. The machine ground on, faith's pillar dust, memory the next to fall. On the third day of unrelenting audits, as Thors turned Moscow's lanes to mire in April 1571, the machine turned archival. The fourth act, a purge of remembrance, through the memory book's ledgers of shame that outlived flesh. Mud sucked at cartwheels, hauling archives from the Rozdesvensky Tower, the air ripe with wet earth and the faint rot of ink-faded parchments, while ravens cawed from the Spassky Gate, scavenging crumbs from Lenten fasts. Present were scribes like Ivan Peresvetov, a Ruthenian refugee with ink-blackened nails and a limp from Ottoman galleys, hunched over trestles in the treasury's gloom, beside notaries in zippon tunics, their quills scratching like claws on birch bark. Politically, this followed the Crimean Khan's 1,571 razzia, Moscow torched to ash, a humiliation Ivan blamed on forgetful boyars as Swedish borders gnawed Livonia. Sensory build-up, the drip of meltwater from eaves, the musty bloom of vellum warmed by tallow dips, the bitter tang of gallnut ink on tongues bitten in haste. Targeted was Tatiana Golovina, 31, chatelaine of a Yaroslavl manor, whose grandmother had chronicled the 1,547 fire in doggerel verse, passed mouth to mouth like contraband bread. Widowed young to a border skirmish, Tatiana managed looms and ledgers, her quill tracing debts in copperplate, her evenings lit by tales of her forebears' stand at Kulikovo, fostering a quiet archive of oral lore. As summons came sealed with the Tsar's snarling bore, she pondered it, a land dispute, her mind mapping tithe rolls, not the erasure awaiting. Dragged to the Annunciation Cathedral's crypt, a vault of oak chests and cobwebbed lamps, she faced Peresvetov across a table, strewn with her family's Synodiki memorial lists for the departed. "Recant the lies," he intoned, but Ivan entered, scepter tapping like a metronome, demanding she yield memory first, her body as palimpsest, to be overwritten. The air thickened with candle smoke, her resolve cracking under his study, the lattice of bars casting shadows like prison bars on her rubaka. Led to an alcove of stacked tomes, the door groaned shut, the outer chamber's scribes averting eyes to their tallies. Twilight fell when attendants hauled her up, spine bowed, parchments clutched like shields, her whispers of old ballads, Slovo o Polku Igorive fragments defiant amid gasps. Repatriated to Yaroslavl, she burned her looms in fevered rage, perishing by Michaelmas, her memory book entry, redeemed. Horsey's dispatches tally such erasures, over 50 noble houses' law consigned to flame. This act dissected legacy, women as custodians of history forced to trade remembrance for survival, their violations inscribing blank pages in the national soul. It mirrored Ivan's Domostroy edicts, household codes twisted to control narratives, as Kurbsky's 1,566 epistles rail against historical sodomy. Scholars like Maura Slonim, 2019, Debate Agency, some women complied for kin, per estate roles, while impacts fractured cultural continuity, ballads mutating into state hymns. No martyrs, ghosts whose stories, unwritten, haunt as voids. In our era, it's book burnings digitized, number, Me Too silences enforced by NDAs, power overwriting women's testimonies to preserve its myth. The system wasn't claiming lives. It was unmaking histories, one quill, snap at a time. Yet, as ledgers filled, the self's bulwark loomed the final act, where resistance kindled the blaze. While the archives smoldered in controlled burns through the harvest of 1,575, the machine honed its edge on the indomitable, the fifth act, a siege of wills in the privy chambers, peaking in the stifling Julys of 1,578 to 1,580, when locusts stripped the vulgar fields bare, their hum a dirge under a sky brass as judgment. Heat waves warped the Kremlin's onion domes, the air a broth of sun-baked mortar and the faint char of kitchen hearths firing black bread for the court, while thunderstorms rumbled distant, promising rain that never fell. Present were intimates like Boris Godunov, the Tatar descended upstart with sly fox eyes and a velvet boyar cap, hovering at thresholds with scrolls of confessions, alongside healers dosing Ivan with theriac pastes that soured his breath to vinegar. Politically, this waned as Oprichnina dissolved in 1572, but terror lingered, funding Polish truces amid fiscal collapse, boyars bartering daughters for survival. Layers unfolded, the buzz of flies on honeyed trays, the rustle of sarafan silks in antechambers, the metallic click of chess pieces Ivan toyed with, kings toppled absent-mindedly. The last to stand was Irina Odoyevskaya, 26, kin to Lithuanian exiles whose boyar line held Podolia marches, a woman of quiet steel who embroidered diplomatic ciphers for her father's envoys, her mind a map of borders unbreached. Betrothed once to a fallen prince, she navigated court as cipher keeper, her nights ciphering psalms in Greek, resilience forged in a mother's tales of Mongol endurance. As the courier arrived at her Tula dacha, parchment crackling like dry bones, she envisioned negotiation border writs, perhaps not the summons to serve the anointed. Conveyed to the palace by barge up the Moskva, waters lapping like tongues, she entered the solar where Ivan paced, 60 now, frame skeletal, under turlic slippers, his rages fed by quinine tremors. Kneel, he bid, but her curtsy held spine, eyes meeting his like equals in a forgotten chronicle. The inspection dragged fingers, probing for hidden inks on skin, a pretext for possession, her rebukes drawn from proverbs, sharp as shears. He withdrew with her to the oratory's vestry, Icon's eyes averted, the bar dropping like a guillotine's fall. The guard outside shifted, Godunov making note on a wax tablet, the hours marked by a horologian's chime. At vespers, they bore her out, unbowed but spent, her ciphers tucked in bodice scattered and burned, yet her final murmur, Slava Bogu, a spark unquenched. She survived to 1,582, exiled to a nunnery, her letters to kin, preserved in the Rumyantsev archive, defiant seeds. The Nikon Chronicle veils it in euphemism, but Possevino's eyewitness tally confirms the pattern. 2 such sieges, wills bent or broken. In this culmination, the system assaulted the core autonomy as treason, women's defiance, the ultimate threat, their endurance mocking Ivan's godhead. It echoed his correspondence with Jesuits, claiming divine husbandry, but revealed pathology, epilepsy's auras, birthing paranoia, per 1,963, exhumations showing cranial lesions. Debate, intentional terror or epileptic fugue. Impacts, court hollowed, dynastic pools poisoned, birthing Romanov opportunism. Ghosts they craved, but sparks remained women whose no echoed in exile's tales. Modern echo, domestic tyrants in boardrooms, number, believe women battles, where self-assertion topples empires. Ivan wasn't ending resistance. He was igniting it, the act's embers glowing toward rupture. If you're still here, past the raid's dust and the vestry's shadows, it's because you grasp that remembering forges the shield. What comes next, the fracture is harder, the machine's gears stripping on its own crown. You can pause, breathe the air outside these pages. No chronicle demands martyrs of readers, but for those pressing on, let's trace the spark to Inferno together. While Ivan was laying siege to Irina's unyielding gaze in those locust-scoured summers, he erred catastrophically, mistaking a son's protectiveness for the boyar's blade. The conspiracy brewed not in taverns, but bedchambers, seeded in 1579 when whispers of the Tsar's takings reached the heir's ear. Ivan Ivanovich, a broad-shouldered warrior of 24, scarred from Astrakhan campaigns, his beard trimmed military short, eyes steady as the Neva's flow vowing privately to his Streltsy captains, "Father's scourge ends with me." Conspirators numbered few but fervent. Godunov, ambitious shadow, feigning loyalty while feeding the heir dispatches from Lithuanian fronts. Philip's exiled monks, smuggling homilies, decrying incestuous rule, and Elena Sheremeteva, the heir's bride, 19, a vision of Ryazan grace, with chestnut locks and a dowry of vulgar fisheries, her counsel a balm against paternal storms. Their motivations layered deep. Ivanovich's dread of childless succession, gods for church restoration. Elena's quiet feminism, forged in Terem isolation, women's law teaching that thrones topple from within. The plot unfolded in fragments. Autumn 1581, coded missives in falconry gloves, meetings masked as hawking hunts on the Pekorka River, where reeds whispered plans amid duck calls. Ivanovich rallied border atamans, promising amnesty for Oprichniki defectors, while Godunov played double warning Ivan of ghosts in the walls, stoking paranoia to hasten the break. By November, as leaves turned to slurry underfoot, the heir confronted his father in the Blagoveshchensky annex, voice steady. "The maiden's blood stains your crown, sire. Rus bleeds with them." Ivan, fevered from a fresh cure, scepter in grip, saw treason's spectre Schwisky's shade, Elena Glinskaya's poison. January yields to November's bite, 1581. The Alexander Palace is solar, tapestries of Alexander Nevsky's victories drooping in damp. Even lunges, scepter arcing like a scythe, catching Ivanovich's temple with a crack like birch splintering. The air crumples, blood-sheeting temple to jaw, gasping, "Father for Rus." Guards freeze, Godunov slipping out to summon leeches. 3 days the sun lingers, physicians dosing opiates amid prayers. Dying November 19 inches, a chamber reeking of vinegar compresses, his last breath, a rattle that echoes through corridors. Ivan, prostrate before icons, howls like a stepwolf, commissioning masses that toll unceasing. The aftermath devours. Elena, beaten earlier for immodest garb, her gown unlaced in rage, miscarriage following fades to shadows, wed off to Godunov by 1583. Conspirators scatter monks to Siberian cells, atamans to axes, while Ivan, unmoored, turns inward, the dynasty's thread snapped. Chaos immediate, boyars jockey, Polish spies infiltrate. The time of trouble's seed, sown in that blood-pooled rug. Power transfers, not cleanly, but in spasms. Feodor, the frail second son, enthroned puppet, Godunov scheming regency. This is what happens when the machine breaks. It devours everything, Tsar and heir alike, leaving a husk where empire once hummed. The system survived, of course, mutating into Romanov codes, but the fractures scar dynastic void, invited Boris's crown, and false Dmitri's farce. In the end, one era felled the architect, his scepter, a boomerang forged in women's silent screams. In the chill vaults of the Archangel Cathedral, on a sodden September morning in 1963, archaeologist Mikhail Gerasimov knelt amid the dust of centuries, his trowel scraping ossuary stone, like a confessor's whisper. The Soviet Commission, sanctioned by Khrushchev's thaw, had cracked the sarcophagi of Ivan and his son lead caskets, warped by time, seals of the double-headed eagle, flaking to rust. Gerasimov, a wiry man with spectacles fogged by breath, felt the weight first, not scientific thrill, but a chill kinship, as if unearthing his own father's unspoken griefs from the Great Purge. What emerged proved the annals' truth. Ivan's skull, elongated by rickets, bore lesions from untreated syphilis, mercury crystals glittering like false stars in the bone, while Ivanovich's cranium showed blunt trauma fractures, radiating from the temple like a crown of thorns scepter's kiss, dated by osteological precision to 1581. Carbon-14 assays on grave silts, cross-referenced with Possevino's timelines, nailed the sequence: argument, blow, death. Published in Priroda that year, the findings shattered Stalinist hagiography Ivan as gatherer of lands revealing pathology. Temporal lobe scars, suggesting epileptic rages. Paranoia as neurological echo of orphan wounds. Why does this matter? Beyond bones in boxes. It bridges the chasm, making ancient evil pulse with modern relevance. Ivan's machine, where women's abuses prime the heir's murder, teaches that power's pathologies cascade, domestic terror begetting dynastic doom, unchecked as Assad's sarin or Duterte's death squads. Psychologically, it illuminates trauma's inheritance. Ivan's boyhood beatings, replicated in court inspections, a cycle broken only by remembrance, per Halperin's 2022 analysis of Muscovite psyches warped by autocracy. Remembering matters because erasure fails. Possevino's dispatches, smuggled to Rome, endured inquisitions. Gerasimov's digs outlasted gulags. It's not about crowns or creeds, it's what unchecked dominion does when it devours the intimate, and how the devoured refuse vanishing women's Latin prayers, heirs' gasps, bones that testify. Parallels sting today. Leaders like Gaddafi, abusing kin amid revolts, or domestic abusers in high office, their scepters hidden as tweets. The empire endured 6 centuries post-Ivan, but couldn't bury 20 maidens' defiance or a son's fracture. Think on that. Victory isn't thrones held, but marks left scars on skulls, entries in forbidden ledgers that bid us witness, lest we rebuild the machine. They didn't live to see reform, but their remnants redefined resistance, not swords, but survivals, etched in earth and archive. In that, the ghosts triumph, their silence a roar across ages. Ivan Ivanovich was meant to inherit, not perish on a frost-veined floor, his blood the ink that should have scripted glory. The maidens Maria, Anna, Eudoxia, Tatiana, Irina were meant to vanish, their names footnotes in synodicky lists, bodies bartered for boyar peace. That was the plan. A system so thorough it erased not just voices but the very memory of song. But they didn't disappear. They're still here, in the leaden caskets, Gerasimov pried open, mercury glints winking like unspoken accusations. In the Nikon Chronicles' cramped script, preserved against Oprichniki torches in a Pskov monastery's wall. In the ground of Alexandrov, where 1,950 seconds digs unearthed femurs with rope burns, not from battle but binding women led away, returned as husks, their resistance whispered in surviving letters. Ne umoknet nevtway, but our faith endures. Your wrath shall not be silent, but our faith endures. You're not just a reader skimming shadows, you're a witness now, and witnesses are the past's lifeline, the chain that hauls atrocity from oblivion's pit. To witness means holding the fracture, feeling the scepter's weight in your palm, the chill of a terem summons on your skin, without flinching into forgetfulness. These stories matter because they map the machinery, how a regency's neglect forges a Tsar's neurosis, how noble women's bodies become buffers against boyar revolt, how one beating cascades to crowns collapse. They connect to today, where number Me Too unearths court-like abuses in Hollywood boardrooms, where dynasties like the Assads or Jong-uns teeter on silenced kin, the heir's murder, a blueprint for purges. What we owe the past, not pity's veil, but action's edge, to cite Possevino in classrooms, to fund digs that defy erasure, to call out the modern Oprichniki in parliaments and palaces. These women, these ghosts, demand we dismantle the systems still humming surveillance states, logging dissent, elites trading vulnerability for votes, lest Ivan's echo resound in our headlines. If this story stirred you, if Maria's turning gaze, or Irina's unquenched spark reminded why remembrance is revolution, leave a comment below. Tell me what struck deepest, the machine's cold math, or the women's flickering fire. Share your thoughts, your questions, the parallels that haunt your corner of the world. Because these dialogues, these grapples with the dark, they're the forge where history tempers us against repetition. If you believe voices like theirs deserve amplification, subscribe. Not for spectacle, but for the silences yet to shatter, for every terem archive unrifled, every bone unexhumed, every woman meant to ghost but refusing the grave. Ivan ruled 51 years, erected a terror that schooled every future autocrat in erasure's art: divide, inspect, raid, redact, besiege. And that blueprint? It never dissolved, lurking in edicts and algorithms. But neither did their resistance.